In the 1870s and 1880s, across North America and Europe, hundreds of grand hotels appeared in cities that had barely established their rail connections. These weren't modest inns or boarding houses. They were architectural monuments, 5, 6, sometimes 7 stories tall, with marble lobbies, gas chandeliers, and dining rooms that could seat 300 guests. Official records describe them as responses to growing tourism and business travel. But when you map their construction dates against population records and transportation infrastructure, something doesn't align. Many of these hotels opened years before the cities around them had developed the commercial activity to justify them. The Cosmopolitan Hotel in Denver opened in 1881 with 300 rooms when the city's population was barely 35,000. The Grand Pacific in Chicago was built to accommodate 500 guests in 1873, just 2 years after the Great Fire, when much of the downtown area remained skeletal. The Palace Hotel in San Francisco, completed in 1875, featured 755 rooms at a time when the city's tourism industry was virtually non-existent. These weren't investments made on speculation. They were structures that functioned immediately, as if the demand had already been calculated. The scale wasn't the only mismatch. It was the uniformity. This documentary examines architectural patterns, construction timelines, and infrastructure development in the context of historical debate. It does not make factual claims about lost civilizations or hidden histories. All observations are presented for consideration, not conclusion. The standard explanation holds that these hotels were built by industrialists and railroad magnates anticipating future growth. That investment capital flowed into hospitality infrastructure as part of the broader expansion of the American and European economies during the Gilded Age. That architects borrowed designs from European models and adapted them to New World ambitions. The timeline supports this in broad strokes. Rail networks were expanding rapidly. Wealth was concentrating in urban centers. International expositions and trade fairs created temporary surges in demand. But the timing, when examined closely, reveals friction. The Sherman House in Chicago was rebuilt in 1873 with 700 rooms. The city's train stations couldn't yet handle the passenger volume that would justify such capacity. The Lindell Hotel in St. Louis opened in 1863 with 500 rooms, during the Civil War, when leisure travel had collapsed and military logistics dominated transportation. The Palmer House, also in Chicago, opened in 1871 just 13 days before the Great Fire destroyed it, then was rebuilt in 1873 with even greater capacity. The investment logic becomes difficult to track. These weren't gradual expansions. They were full-scale constructions that appeared within narrow windows, often in clusters, across cities that had no immediate economic reason to support them. The construction quality deepens the discomfort. The Palmer House featured silver dollars embedded in its barbershop floor. The Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island, completed in 1887, had the longest porch in the world, 660 feet, despite serving a seasonal population on a remote island in Lake Huron. The Windsor Hotel in Montreal, built in 1878, included central heating, hydraulic elevators, and fireproofing systems that exceeded municipal codes that didn't yet exist. These weren't primitive attempts at luxury. They were technically sophisticated, designed with systems that anticipated regulations and standards that wouldn't be formalized for another decade. And they all appeared within roughly the same 20-year period. Between 1870 and 1890, nearly every major city in the United States and Canada constructed at least one grand hotel, often more. The timing wasn't staggered by region or economic development. It was synchronized. Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, St. Louis, Denver, San Francisco, Montreal, Toronto, all saw comparable construction within overlapping years. The architectural styles varied slightly by region, but the internal systems were nearly identical. Steam heat, gas lighting, hydraulic elevators, central kitchens, ballrooms with capacities in the hundreds, dining rooms with identical table configurations, laundry facilities that could process linens for hundreds of guests daily. The personnel structures mirrored each other. Hotel registries from the 1880s show staffing ratios that seem disproportionate. The Grand Pacific in Chicago employed over 400 staff members to serve a hotel that rarely operated above 60% capacity in its first 5 years. The Palace Hotel in San Francisco had a staff-to-guest ratio of nearly 1:2, a standard that wouldn't become common until the luxury hotel boom of the 1920s. Training records, where they survive, describe hierarchies and protocols that appear fully formed: head concierges, night managers, floor supervisors, bellhop rotations, all implemented from opening day as if adapted from a template. The financial models are harder to reconstruct. Many of these hotels operated at a loss for years. The Windsor in Montreal didn't turn a profit until 1891, 13 years after opening. The Palmer House required multiple refinancings before stabilizing. Yet construction continued. New hotels appeared even as existing ones struggled to fill rooms. The capital sources are documented: railroad investors, mining fortunes, European banking syndicates. But the confidence behind the investment becomes harder to explain when the operational outcomes consistently underperform projections. The geographic distribution adds another layer. These hotels didn't just appear in established commercial centers. They appeared in frontier towns that were still developing basic municipal services. The Antlers Hotel in Colorado Springs opened in 1883 when the town's population was under 5,000. Populations migrated. Economic systems collapsed. And within 15 years, both Britain and the United States began constructing the largest transportation networks in human history. The timing raises questions that standard explanations struggle to address. But those questions lead somewhere deeper, into patterns of infrastructure, administration, and architectural inheritance that span continents and appear with a synchronization that feels less like parallel development and more like coordinated expansion. The railway networks weren't isolated projects. They were part of a broader infrastructure wave that swept through Britain and the United States in the same narrow window of time. A wave that included canals, water systems, municipal buildings, and administrative frameworks that all share the same characteristic. They were built before the populations existed to justify them. Let's start with the Erie Canal. Construction began in 1817, 1 year after the global climate disruption of 1816. The canal would span 363 miles, connecting the Hudson River to Lake Erie, cutting through wilderness and farmland across upstate New York. When construction started, the counties along the proposed route had a combined population of fewer than 200,000 people. The canal was designed to handle commercial tonnage in the millions. The infrastructure preceded the economy it was meant to serve by at least 2 decades. By the time the canal opened in 1825, it could accommodate 4,000 boats per year. Actual traffic in 1825, fewer than 1,200 boats. The capacity was there. The demand wasn't. And yet, within 10 years, the canal was operating at full capacity. Towns that didn't exist in 1817, Rochester, Syracuse, Buffalo, had become major commercial hubs by 1840. The infrastructure didn't respond to growth. It created the conditions for growth. The same pattern appears in Britain's canal system. The Caledonian Canal in Scotland, completed in 1822, was engineered to allow full-sized naval vessels to pass through the Great Glen, connecting the North Sea to the Atlantic. It was one of the most ambitious engineering projects in British history. But Scotland's naval traffic in 1822 didn't require it. The canal operated at a loss for decades. The justification given at the time was future strategic necessity. Future necessity, not present demand. The Manchester Ship Canal, proposed in the 1820s and finally completed in 1894, was designed to bypass Liverpool's port fees and bring ocean-going vessels directly into Manchester. But Manchester in the 1820s was a textile hub, not a major shipping center. The infrastructure anticipated an industrial scale that wouldn't materialize for 50 years. Why plan for a future you can't predict? Now let's talk about urban water systems. In 1842, the British Parliament passed the Public Health Act, which mandated the construction of centralized water and sewage systems in major cities. Within a decade, cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and Liverpool had built reservoirs, aqueducts, and distribution networks capable of serving populations far larger than their current size. Manchester's Longdendale Reservoir System, completed in 1877, was designed to supply 25 million gallons per day. Manchester's population in 1877 was 350,000. The system could serve a city of over 1 million. The planners anticipated decades of growth and built accordingly. But here's the friction. They didn't just build for projected growth. They built for a specific type of growth: industrial, urban, centralized. They built as if they knew what was coming. Cross the Atlantic again. In 1837, New York City began construction on the Croton Aqueduct, a 41-mile system designed to bring fresh water from the Croton River into Manhattan. The aqueduct could deliver 90 million gallons per day. New York's population in 1837 was roughly 300,000. Daily water consumption, approximately 10 million gallons. The system was built to serve a city 9 times larger than the one that existed. By 1860, New York's population had grown to 800,000. The Croton system was still operating below capacity. It wouldn't reach full utilization until the 1890s, more than 50 years after it was built. Same pattern, same scale, same timing. Then there are the grain elevators. In Buffalo, New York, the first steam-powered grain elevator was built in 1843. It could store 55,000 bushels of grain and load cargo ships at a rate 10 times faster than manual labor. Buffalo's grain traffic in 1843 didn't require it. The Erie Canal had only been open for 18 years. The Midwest wasn't yet the agricultural powerhouse it would become. But by 1860, Buffalo had 12 grain elevators storing over 4 million bushels. The infrastructure had been in place for nearly 2 decades when the demand finally caught up. In Britain, the same logic appeared in the construction of massive dockside warehouses in Liverpool, London, and Glasgow, structures built in the 1840s and 1850s with storage capacities that wouldn't be fully utilized until the 1880s. The systems were consistently ahead of their time. Not by years, by decades. And then there's the administrative layer. In 1835, Britain passed the Municipal Corporations Act, which standardized the governance structures of towns and cities across England and Wales. Within a decade, over 200 municipalities had adopted nearly identical administrative frameworks: councils, mayors, record-keeping systems, public works departments. The standardization wasn't gradual. It was rapid and comprehensive. In the United States, the same pattern emerged. Between 1830 and 1850, hundreds of towns across the Midwest and Northeast adopted city charters with nearly identical language. The charters outlined taxation systems, public works responsibilities, and administrative hierarchies. 2 nations. No formal coordination. Nearly identical governance structures. The consistency suggests inheritance rather than innovation. Let's return to the railroads. In Britain, the railway mania of the 1840s saw over 9,000 miles of track proposed, with over 6,000 miles actually built. The investment required was staggering, roughly £200 million, equivalent to nearly half of Britain's GDP at the time. But the strange part isn't the investment. It's the coordination. Railway companies across Britain used the same engineering standards, the same gauge with a few exceptions, the same signaling systems, and the same architectural styles for stations. There was no central authority mandating this. No government regulation enforcing uniformity. And yet, the systems looked as if they'd been designed by a single hand. In the United States, the same phenomenon appeared. By 1850, American railroads had standardized on a 4-foot 8.5-inch gauge with regional exceptions, adopted similar braking and coupling systems, and built stations that shared architectural DNA: brick construction, arched windows, clock towers. The similarity wasn't coincidental, but it also wasn't legislated. Whether this reflects inheritance or convergence, the pattern is undeniable. There's one more layer worth examining: the buildings themselves. Railway stations, municipal buildings, and industrial structures built in the 1840s and 1850s share a specific architectural vocabulary. They're built from brick and stone. They feature arched windows, high ceilings, and load-bearing walls capable of supporting far more weight than their actual use required. St. Pancras Station in London, opened in 1868, features a Gothic Revival facade and a train shed with a 240-foot span, the largest single-span structure in the world at the time. But here's the question: why build to that scale? The station was designed to serve the Midland Railway, which in 1868 carried fewer passengers than other London terminals. The building could accommodate 5 times the actual traffic. Across the Atlantic, the same logic. Philadelphia's Broad Street Station, opened in 1881, could handle 100 trains per day. Actual traffic in 1881, 40 trains per day. The infrastructure consistently exceeded the need. Not by accident, by design. And then there's the timing. All of this, the canals, the railways, the water systems, the grain elevators, the municipal governance structures, all of it appears in the same narrow window, 1815 to 1860. Before 1815, none of this infrastructure existed at scale. After 1860, it was everywhere. 45 years. 2 nations. Same systems. Same timing. Same over-engineering. The standard explanation is industrialization. The rise of steam power. The expansion of markets. The growth of populations. But the infrastructure didn't follow industrialization. It preceded it. The factories came after the railways. The populations came after the water systems. The commerce came after the canals. The sequence feels backwards. And that brings us to the term that hovers over all of this. A label that's been used, misused, and reinterpreted in ways that range from historical curiosity to speculative framework. The question isn't whether the label is accurate. The question is whether the patterns it attempts to describe are real, observable, and consistent enough to warrant closer examination. The term Tartaria first appeared on European maps in the 18th and early 19th centuries. It wasn't a single nation. It was a catch-all label for vast territories across Central Asia, regions that European cartographers knew existed but couldn't define with precision. The term faded from maps by the mid-1800s as imperial powers filled in geographic blanks with more specific names. In recent years, the term has been repurposed. Online communities use Tartaria as shorthand for a hypothesis that the infrastructure, architecture, and administrative systems appearing across Europe and North America in the 19th century weren't purely the result of independent development, but represented something inherited, something built upon foundations that predated the official timeline. There are 3 ways to interpret the patterns we've examined. The first interpretation is convergence. 2 nations experiencing similar industrial and demographic pressures independently developed similar solutions. The railways, canals, and governance structures emerged because they solved the same problems in the same historical moment. This explanation accounts for the synchronization. It relies on parallel innovation driven by shared conditions. The second interpretation is inheritance. The infrastructure wasn't built from scratch. It was restored, expanded, or repurposed from earlier systems. Systems whose origins are either poorly documented or deliberately obscured in the historical record. This explanation accounts for the over-engineering, the architectural consistency, and the speed of implementation. The third interpretation is foresight. The planners of the 1820s through 1850s were simply better at anticipating future growth than we give them credit for. They built with confidence in demographic and economic expansion that hadn't yet occurred. This explanation accounts for the scale, but struggles with the precision of the timing. None of these interpretations can be proven definitively. Each has merit. Each has gaps. But the evidence invites examination. Return to 1816. The year without a summer. Global climate disruption. Mass migration. Economic collapse. And within 15 years, the largest coordinated infrastructure expansion in human history begins, simultaneously across 2 continents, with systems that look as if they were designed by a single hand. The timing is uncomfortable. The term Tartaria, as it's used today, isn't a claim about a specific lost civilization. It's a metaphor for the discomfort of patterns that don't fit cleanly into the narratives we've been given. The railways that preceded the towns. The water systems built for cities that didn't yet exist. The governance structures that appeared fully formed. The architectural consistency across oceans. These aren't inventions, they're observations. And observations don't require belief. They require attention. The infrastructure is still here. The stations still stand. The canals still flow. The records still exist. The evidence isn't hidden. It's been sitting in plain sight for nearly 2 centuries. Whether it represents inheritance, convergence, or exceptional foresight, that's for each person to examine and decide. But the patterns remain. And the timing still raises questions that the standard explanations struggle to fully address.